So it's my opportunity now to welcome you to the third and final of our community listening events. This one focused on community culture. We've discussed police reform, we've discussed housing and affordable housing opportunities. And in each one of those prior meetings, we have focused on action items. This particular meeting tonight is really focused on listening. We are not necessarily looking for the town council to take a particular action. We are not looking for particularly a policy directive that the council can then vote on. What we really want to do is listen to the community, flesh out what those things are that we need to think about, what we need to do going forward, how we need to shape these discussions going forward. That said, if something does come out of tonight that the council can take action on, the council's ready to do that. And we are prepared to open up our agenda to do that. But that is not really our focus tonight. So I want to welcome you, let you know that when we started the inclusivity and diversity effort, we focused as a town on gathering those people who could help us talk about this, because it's a difficult topic, but talk about it in a productive and constructive way. So I'm very fortunate tonight to be joined by Rabbi Aaron, Nika Saburi, Mariko Sayak, our council person, and others who are going to help lead this discussion as we go forward. I did want to bring up, because it's unfortunate and actually timely, Los Gatos had an unfortunate experience the last couple of days where someone went and tagged the South Bay Cultural Center for the Turkish population with an obscene tag. I want people out there to know that the police department responded right away, called in the FBI. It's being investigated as a hate crime. And this afternoon, myself and Town Manager Pravetti had the opportunity to talk to the Consul General for Turkey about this incident and assure them in the strongest terms that we condemn it and that we will communicate with them going forward and that we apologize for what happened. And that we had this opportunity tonight to examine ourselves and to look at what we can do to make sure that kind of thing doesn't happen again. So as we do this discussion, I would ask us all to think about, what does inclusivity mean? What does diversity mean? It's not just men, women, racial divisions, sexual identities, ethnic divisions. It may be foreign countries, it may be foreign nationals, it may be somebody that's down the street from you that has a different religion that you don't understand. But think broadly about what this means and how we can truly be inclusive. And so with that, I want to turn it over to Councilwoman Mariko Sayak, who's really been out in front of this issue. She has a passion for it, she understands it, and we are fortunate that she is going to help lead us in this discussion tonight. So Mariko?
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. And before we begin, I do want to welcome everyone to tonight's workshop. As Mayor Johnson said, tonight is really about listening, learning, and receiving input on what Los Gatos means to you. And given what we have been experiencing these past few months, given what many of us have been experiencing for the past few years, this really is an opportunity to share our stories and see how we can learn from one another so that we can build a community that we all feel comfortable with and that we all take pride in on a day-to-day basis. Before we begin, I did want to give an overview of what tonight will look like. I'm pleased to be here as our mayor is, and I do want to also acknowledge that you will be meeting several of our town staff, as well as Vice Mayor Spector, and Council Member Rennie will also be in some of these discussions. What we're really going to do is we're going to take advantage of Zoom, and because we're not able to meet in a real life experience, we're going to utilize the breakout rooms. We'll begin and use polling features that will be anonymous so people can share in real time their answers to some of the questions that we'd like some answers to. You will hear from some of our panelists who are going to share their stories, their experiences, their perspectives, and most importantly, why they are working with us to continue this work. And ultimately, as we said, the goal is to really learn from one another and see what we can do moving forward. This is a snapshot in time. We're hopeful that these conversations will continue. At the end of today's hour and a half to 2 hours, we'll talk about how we can continue that conversation, and then ultimately what we can do as a town to reconvene and see if we've made any progress month to month, year to year, and see how exactly we want to measure that. But meanwhile, these are real experiences, and we ask all of you to be welcoming and respectful of what you hear. It's okay to disagree, but it's not okay to be disagreeable. And some of the stories that you may hear may be painful for others to share. So again, let's talk in authentic conversations, but let's also be respectful, even as we find that there's some disagreement in some of the conversations. Okay, and I'll just jump right into it. And Mr. Andrews, if you could just share the screen. I know a lot of us, we talk about Los Gatos, and there's a lot of, we'll be spending a lot of time discussing experiences and feelings. But before we begin, what we wanted to do was share some statistics. So what is Los Gatos in numbers? And hopefully that'll give us some context as we start looking at not only future census data, but just how we can take these numbers into more of our conversations and realize that we're not what we necessarily think we are. And so the demographics that are in front of you, we have comparison to Santa Clara County, Los Gatos's population. You'll see that we are 71.7% white. And compared to 30.6 of Santa Clara County, that's a pretty significant difference that our town has versus the rest of our county. Asian population, 14.4% compared to the county's 39. Hispanic Latinx, 8.4 versus 25%. And our Black population, 1.5 versus 2.8. And for Native American, it's always a good reminder that we are on Native Ohlone land. We have 0.1% of our population. And for mixed races, 4.2 and 4.6, which is pretty comparable to what we have in the rest of the county. As you all know, and hopefully you've all filled out, we are calculating based on census numbers, and it'll be interesting to share with you next year how this is looking for our town as well as our county. For housing characteristics, 65.7 is owner occupied in Los Gatos versus 56.7 in the county. 34.3 is our rental, and there's 2.52%. What I think is interesting, and I just did some research today, in Los Gatos, majority of our zoning is for single family residential. 91% of our zoning is single family residential. And as we all learned from our conversations at the last workshop, that's an area where we as a town, as well as a community, can make some strides and make some improvements if we're looking at more inclusivity and diversity, not only socioeconomically, but as well as racially. And then for the median mortgage, 4,000 plus, and median rent is 2,209. High school diploma, 96.7. So for any students that are out there like Nika, let's keep that statistic high. And with bachelor degree, 67.4% compared to Santa Clara County of 51.3. And I think as we are all in a remote environment, I think we're very fortunate that 96% of us have a computer at home and 93% have internet access. As we've seen during this pandemic, not many people in the rest of our county can share those same statistics. And so that's one area where we are fortunate, but mindful also that there are still 7% in town that do not have internet access, and we need to do more and we need to do better. Thank you, Arn. Okay, and so what we'd like to do next is we'd like to utilize our initial polling. Let's see, Arn, if you can answer, if you could share that answer. Share that question. And then I'm going to ask, I'm not sure who's exactly going to enable the poll, but the first question that we'd like for all of you to answer and utilizing the poll feature is, what has made you feel welcome in Los Gatos? And you have the options there. All of these are anonymous, and we'll start to see them in real time. But if you could just share, what is it that has made you feel Los Gatos, made you feel welcome in our town? No?
Mariko, I think everybody has finished answering.
Okay, and then Shelley, if you could help me out here, where do we get to see the answers? Here we go. Okay. And so utilizing the chat feature, I'd love to invite people to elaborate. For those who indicated friendly neighbors, so those who indicate, is there anyone who'd love to share what exactly, when you say friendly neighbor, is it your immediate neighbor? Is it because of our home association? What exactly, if someone doesn't mind sharing that with us? So. And while we're waiting for someone to type that in, same thing with the school community, faith community, and town events. So if there's someone that feels comfortable sharing with us exactly if there was a specific event, if there is a specific a church, if there's a specific neighborhood that you feel has made you feel welcome, please feel free to share. And particularly for those that indicated other, I'd like to hear that as well. I think all of us would. Okay. Okay, well, here, let me share with, while we're waiting. I know I shared with many of you my story when I moved into town. The immediate attraction to Los Gatos for us was the town events. So we moved into Los Gatos during the summer, and utilizing the farmers markets and the free concerts. I think that was the best way for my family and I to get to know our neighbors and the community we wanted. Okay. And I'm seeing the same thing, town events, connecting us as community, neighbors, parade, farmers market, wine walk, and the social scene. Okay, thank you. Okay, and so, this is what Shakespeare in the Park. That's definitely one of the things that I miss now. And so what I want you to think about these different events and these different experiences. And it's a warm up, because as we go into our breakout rooms, we'd like to hear more, and we'd like for all of you to elaborate to one another, not only the events, but the emotions and what you felt as you were walking down the street. Do people look like you? Do people talk like you? Those are the things that we'd really like to hear during our breakout sessions. So. But one of the things that we'd like to do now is I'd like to invite our panelists. We're very fortunate that Rabbi Melanie Aaron and Nika Sabori have been working with us to pull together not only the community workshops, but just really to help us focus on some of the conversations that we as a town should be having, and the conversations that we would like to continue to have in the future. And so, Rabbi Aaron, if you wouldn't mind sharing with us your experience and specifically your motivations for working towards a more inclusive Los Gatos.
I'd be glad to. And I'm just going to ask everyone, if it's not too much trouble, if you would put on your video at this point. I'm slowly getting used to talking to little boxes of people. And so it's so much nicer to see your faces as we share this time together. So I wonder if you've ever had the experience that I've had of getting to a party and realizing that you were wearing the wrong clothes, that somehow you didn't get the memo that everyone else seemed to have. And I think that's a good illustration of how cultural messages are often conveyed in such a subtle way that we might not even be aware of them. That's kind of how culture is. As long as we're immersed in it, like the fish in the water, it's very hard to see. But sometimes when we move to a new community, or when we talk to someone who's new to our community, we can get a better sense of what's different about our culture. The town of Los Gatos has its own culture, but it may be hard for some of us who've lived here a long time to even notice the culture. For some of us, the culture makes such common sense. We feel so comfortable. But for others, that might not be the case. And so, what I'd like to do is to share 3 stories from my experience about culture and how it's communicated. I have 3 children, and when they were little and I was a mom with a full-time job, their preschool used to have events for parents, really for moms, that were held in the middle of the morning. Now, I'm sure no one thought about this consciously, but that was a way of conveying a cultural norm that moms are people who are free in the middle of the day and can come to preschool. A second story. When I came to Los Gatos as a rabbi in 1990, I was approached about our congregation's non-participation in the Christmas parade, which I learned was a really big deal in this town. So I tried to politely explain that it wasn't that our congregation lacked civic pride, but meanwhile, I was told that Christmas isn't a religious holiday. I wondered how the pastor of the church across the street from the temple would feel about that definition. Eventually, the parade was renamed the Los Gatos Christmas and Holidays Parade, and now it's just the holiday parade. But the truth is, Thanksgiving is a whole lot easier for our interfaith community. And even very good people who embrace the ideal of America as a multi-faith and diverse society can sometimes forget that not everybody goes to church. A culture of go along to get along can leave people feeling that they have to drop aspects of their identity and culture to truly be part of the community. One last story. My oldest daughter, and maybe on the screen somewhere there's someone who taught her, was a very compliant child and extremely cooperative in school. But during her last semester, her senior year at Los Gatos High School, she managed to get thrown out of her English class, which is a requirement for graduation. As a parent, you can imagine my concern at that point. So, what had happened? Her teacher, seemingly with the best of intentions, had led a discussion of stereotypes, which deeply hurt a Vietnamese student. And then the teacher somehow offended the student's parents who had come in to talk with her about it. My daughter and another friend left the class with this crying girl, and then the teacher wouldn't let them back in. It did eventually resolve, but it provided an interesting bookend to my daughter's educational career in California. Shortly after we arrived in California, there was an incident which made us concerned about the community's culture and what was tolerated as humor. In 1992, some of you may remember Ted Simonson, who was then the principal of LGHS, at a fundraising dinner made remarks that were cruelly dismissive of the African American and gay community. The newspaper report still exists online, so I can quote him directly. He said, I understand that they are going to change the name of the Bay Bridge to the Walt Disney Bridge because it connects Fairyland to Jungle Land. That was the beginning of our experience in Los Gatos. My daughter's schooling in California ended with what was essentially a lesson on intent and impact. Though back in 2001, we weren't using those words yet. We weren't judging things not only by the intention of the person acting, but also by the impact, by the consequences. Los Gatos has changed a lot in these last years, a great deal since my home was built in 1960 with a restrictive covenant placed on the deed. That means that it limited who the house could be sold to. Los Gatos has changed significantly since I moved here 30 years ago. And it is my hope that it will continue to change in ways that enhance our lives by being more aware of the ways that culture impacts those who live and those who work in our community. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share with you.
Thank you, Rabbi Erin. Nika.
Hello, my name is Nika Sabori, and I'm a sophomore at Los Gatos High School. I've lived in Los Gatos for my entire life, but my parents immigrated here from Iran. I went to Blossom Hill Elementary School, where I often felt out of place because of how I looked in comparison to the other students. I experienced a few incidences of racism. One that stands out to me to this day involved a group of my peers pulling their shirts over their heads to resemble hijabs, holding their hands out as if they were cradling assault rifles, and yelling Allahu Akbar in my face. It wasn't hard for me to recognize that in a town like Los Gatos with such a white population, I was going to experience things like that until I left this town completely. But I didn't want to leave. This is where all my friends are. This is the place my parents came to give me the best education I could possibly have. Which brings me to why I'm here today and why I organized a Black Lives Matter protest in Los Gatos back in June. I don't want kids like me to have to be forced to make that decision, to have to endure bullying and racism in order to have a good education. I believe that the change we need to see in our community starts with our schools. I've only been at Los Gatos High School for a year now, but during my time there, I've noticed that there's also a culture of neglect. Teachers have discussions about race that leave students feeling confused or invalidated. Racial slurs are rampant. Students of color are rare on campus, and those that do attend LGHS have stories that would send people running from this town. Some of these stories were sent to me as a result of this protest, and it is clear to me more than ever that there is a real problem in this town. And as a part of this community, I feel we have a responsibility to fight the racism in Los Gatos, not for our reputation, but for the safety and rights of minorities that are also a part of this community. I know that young people are eager to facilitate this change. On June 3rd, they showed up massively. Protests are not something to fear. When it comes to the youth, we show up to these protests to participate in something that we have a right to and believe in, to visibly oppose the unacceptable mistreatment of Black people in this country, all in an effort to improve this country as a whole and right some truly terrible wrongs. I hope that people will see these protests as a positive show of unity instead of a Marxist anti-government threat. I met some incredible people whose strength in the face of the unacceptable behavior that has come out of this town is something I aspire to have someday. It will always be difficult to walk into a grocery store in Los Gatos and get followed around by an employee, or wave at a police officer and get a dirty look in response, or like someone shared on June 3rd, have slurs yelled at you while you cross the street. These things should appall us. They should motivate us to make change, whether that be in our personal lives, with our relationships, donating to organizations, or pushing our school administrations to have harsher consequences for racist behavior. When I go home and speak to my parents after having experienced some incident of racism, I can feel how much it saddens them that they have had to compromise the respect of their peers for the future of their children. And people will tell me, so go back to where you came from. But it has nothing to do with that. We should all strive for equality, because if one minority can be ostracized, mistreated, and discriminated against for things that have absolutely no inherent wrong, then there's free reign for any and every aspect of a person to be demonized. I don't think this should be our only motivation, but it is true. Discrimination is not based on truth, it is based on hatred. And if people have enough hatred, anything can happen. I truly don't believe it is asking too much that I or others not be hated for who we are. We are your community, and we want to share the same love for this town that many people have, but there is something in the way. And if we come together to fight these issues, protect our neighbors, and be the change, I know that the future generations of families, children, and individuals that live in Los Gatos will enjoy a welcoming and fair community. Thank you.
Thank you, Nika, and thank you, Rabbi Aaron. And so before we move into our breakout sessions, I wanted to just thank both of them for sharing their stories. I think I've shared with many people that I work with that when I began my own career on town council, it wasn't as smooth going as one would hope when one wins the election. And I got some pretty nasty emails, and I got some threats that I was going to be run out of town. And so, it makes us wonder, whose town does this belong to? And ultimately, what can we do as a community so that no one feels that they have to hide their story, which I did many years ago. And it wasn't until the young kids in June and listening to Rabbi Aaron just made me realize that those stories shouldn't be buried. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. And if anything, we have strength by sharing and finding solace in one another. And so one of the key things that we will discuss when we go into our breakout rooms, and your moderators will be asking these questions of you, but if you could give it some thought, we hear quite a bit, especially on our council, the look and feel of Los Gatos. And oftentimes that is associated with our buildings. And we've talked a lot about, well, who are the people in those buildings? And I'd love for all of you to think about not only what does that mean for you? What emotions does that provoke? And what is the culture that should be associated when one talks about the look and the feel of Los Gatos? So you will have 20 minutes when you go into your breakout rooms. You will be, it'll be a random breakout. You'll get your invitation to your room. Expect about 6 to 8 people in there. Again, we ask that we have some honest conversations, be respectful, and ultimately we will be coming back and sharing some of these stories. Once you're there, if we could identify a recorder and remember your breakout room, and then we'll utilize the chat feature when we come back into the main room to share some of the highlights of what we heard. Okay. And so I believe Shelley will be sending all of you invitations to your breakout rooms. Welcome back. And so if we could just utilize the chat feature, as I mentioned, for those that were recording from their breakout rooms, if you could just share some of the larger themes that you heard in your groups. And while we are getting some of that text in the chat room, is there anyone that feels comfortable sharing how they felt listening to their neighbors and to their friends, given the experiences, what was shared?
I just wanted to say that both what Rabbi Aaron and Nika talked about very much resonated for me when I moved here 9 years ago on so many levels, like the working mom, the faith. I don't drink. A lot of events are all revolving around drinking. And then, yeah, what my kids were also telling me about the racial slurs and different bullying type behavior in the high school. That's a lot of what I was hearing as well from my own kids. So yeah, just love the look and feel, love the walkability, access to nature. But I think I left our room saying, but it still feels very lonely being here because, never really made like true, like close friends, that sort of thing.
Thank you for sharing that. And that's important to remember, because as we talk a lot about community, ultimately that loneliness in a community is something that we wouldn't want any one of us to know that someone, I mean, we know it, we're hearing it, and it just hurts when we start to hear it live, and we can have a name and a face associated. So thank you for sharing that. Does anyone else want to share? Were there any surprises based on the conversations that were taking place in your breakout rooms?
I guess I can share.
Okay, Amy?
Yeah. I realize what I'm going to share is negative. Is that okay? That we talk negative? Because now that we're in full session, there's a lot of people I know who have probably heard this from me before, but there's a lot of you maybe who haven't. So while personally, I've really liked Los Gatos and raising my kids here, my younger daughter does not like Los Gatos and does not feel at all comfortable here. So two things, my daughters are mixed race because my husband's not white like me. And my younger daughter, if you saw her, you would assume that she was Hispanic. And her best friend in high school is Black. Well, was, because they're out of high school now. So you put the two of them together, if they went downtown for like a ice cream or whatever, Lululemon, or if they go to Safeway to get, snacks, or when they would leave school and go to Safeway for lunch, they were constantly stared at, constantly given looks, or they were followed around, because the assumption was there's a Black girl, there's a Mexican girl, they're going to steal something. What are they up to? So they were constantly stared at and sometimes given, the evil eye or dirty looks or whatever. You guys, you know what I'm talking about when people are profiled when they walk into a store, because whoever's working there, they think they see trouble, someone who's going to rip them off. And then, I don't know, maybe a lot of you have heard this, but so her friend was constantly called the N-word practically every single day of high school. And maybe a lot of you heard her mom talk at the protest that Nika organized. And she said some very powerful things. So from my perspective, my daughter really opened my eyes to the undercurrent of racism that people of color face here in Los Gatos. And I believe her when she tells me throughout the general area, especially San Jose, because she worked out there and has a lot of friends from San Jose. People from San Jose generally, people of color from San Jose generally view Los Gatos as racist. It's like well known among people of color that Los Gatos is racist. Now, I know a lot of people will vehemently disagree with that. I disagree with it myself when we first started having these conversations at the dinner table. But I really opened my mind and decided to really listen to her and pay more attention. And I came to believe her. And then also from talking to Pilar, who spoke at the rally or the protest, who's also a friend of mine. So while people may vehemently disagree with that fact, mostly because since we're 70% white, if you're white, you really don't see it. You never notice it because it's not targeted at you. So unless you're with your BFF and somebody targets your friend, you're never going to see it. So it's very understandable that you would think it's not there and it's not true because you haven't experienced it. Or, oh, that's an isolated incident. But isolated incidents, that's like a one shot. But these are things that there are hundreds of isolated incidents. And when there are hundreds of them, you can no longer call it an isolated incident. So it just had me rethink things.
Thank you, Amy. And that actually is the poll question that we were going to ask next, and it leads into it. The first question, and if I could ask Shelley to conduct that poll. Have you experienced Los Gatos as a welcoming community? And it'd be interesting to see, given who's in attendance, what those answers are. And while people are filling those out, I did want to highlight that in breakout room 3, we discussed not only the inclusivity of not only race, but also the geographic area of where you live in Los Gatos, downtown versus East Los Gatos, as well as socioeconomic factors, given that there is a perception that everyone in Los Gatos is wealthy. Okay. Does, based on the breakout rooms, is there anything that that you heard that is not necessarily covered based on socioeconomics, based on geographic location, what school you happen to go to, whether it's Los Gatos High versus Lehigh? Is there anything that others heard that they'd like to share with the larger group?
Lynn, do you want to say something from our group?
Sure. Thank you, Rabbi. Hi, Mariko and everyone. One of the last statements that was said in our group I thought was really, really interesting. And that was that our residents who were speaking, or our non-town staff who were speaking, noted the difference between people who have exhibited problematic behavior, who just seem really closed to different races or, different people and change, versus people who are just seem ignorant of the problem. So that really supports value in this type of exercise and its wider effect and application to help open those minds or alert us all to problems that we may not see ourselves.
Thank you. And what breakout room were you in, Lynn?
Number 1.
Number 1. Is there anyone from breakout room 2 that wants to share? Here we go. Okay. And I'm going to put Lisa on the spot. Lisa, would you like to share with us besides writing it? And thank you, though.
Sure. So, so our group, felt that overall Los Gatos was super friendly. The community-oriented events makes everyone feels welcome, but there was this undertone of racism, particularly at the high school. Also, that Los Gatos is primarily known as being a racist community and an affluent community. But prior to the 1989 earthquake, someone shared that it was mostly a working class community. It wasn't always a affluent community. There was a North 40 lawsuit for housing because primarily the feeling was that the town was not welcoming to different types of housing with the housing policies that were in place at the time. However, our group felt that they felt a lot of hope that these conversations are taking place, that people are beginning to talk about these things. Sometimes They feel a little bit of an identity crisis. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's in your face. Overall, it's a safe town, a safe haven. But sometimes it's almost like a gated community, like everybody's in here together, but don't let anybody else in. And I think that about sums it up.
Thank you. And Shelley, do we have the poll results from the first of the question? And so what I'd love with our remaining time, so whoever, I know this is anonymous, but if you feel comfortable, who said yes and who said no, and who's willing to share their answer. And I guess the second question I want people to consider is the fact that 46% said no. Are we okay with this? I think that's the more important question. Are we okay with this? Who says yes and who says no, and who would feel comfortable defending either one?
Mariko, this is Rob. I can make a comment.
Yes, please do.
I said no because you know, I'm white, so I haven't had the racist issue, but I think there still is a elitism in Los Gatos. Even if you're white, you feel like, well, you haven't lived here 30 years, and your parents went to school here, kind of thing. You don't feel as accepted. I lived out in the real East Los Gatos, out near Union, and I felt like I wasn't connected in the town and wasn't meeting people, and I felt like I had to move to downtown in order to get more connected or you know, meet people. You know, we think of ourselves as a small town, and so we must be friendly. But you know, if you go to a real small town, people are friendly. They say hi to you. Now you walk down the streets, and people ignore you. They don't say hi. You know, I know it doesn't help the racism discussion, but I think it's not just a racism problem also.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Councilmember Rennie, for sharing that. And so that makes me happy. 100% said we are not okay with this. And so as we go into our next breakout session, let's talk about, well, what are the social changes that we can do? What emotions do we feel like we need to work on to make a more inclusive Los Gatos? And what changes are we willing to take on ourselves on a personal level or as a community level to make those numbers change? And so I believe we're going to go into different breakout rooms again. And so again, if you could identify a recorder and a facilitator, and we'll have those discussions next. And so similar to what we did last time, if you don't mind sharing in the chat feature, and if someone from each breakout room could just share what are some of the larger themes that your group discussed.
Hi, Mariko, would you like me to start?
Yes, please, Lynn.
Sure. So this is breakout room number 1. I was typing as we got thrown out of the breakout, and I've learned now that erases what you type, which is a bummer. So word to the wise. But there were some interesting concepts. There was some sadness expressed by people who said they realized the image of the town that they thought it was didn't match some of the reality that they experienced. There was a lot of talk about wanting diversity of businesses, and but those businesses needed to be operating in a way that was more welcoming and inclusive. People did not feel sometimes welcomed by the businesses when they came in the stores. They wanted zoning changes and more density of housing to bring in the diversity. And they felt that sometimes the townspeople attitudes against that density was not just because it would create more traffic and crowding, but that it would bring in a racial diversity that wasn't wanted. Not, and then a really neat point that was brought up was, well, that events are the chances to have these melting pots and diverse groups. And that one thing that would really go far would be for either town or businesses or Chamber of Commerce to put up signage throughout the town, that at events or just even throughout the town on banners that says, we are a welcoming community, we are an inclusive community. Maybe photos of different folks from different races and parts of the world, to really visually enforce the message about the goal of inclusivity and welcomingness, and help all of us to do a reminder check to, when we see it, not to just be in our bubble, but to live it and promote that.
Thank you. Thank you. And that raised an idea that we had discussed in our group as well in the first session of our public art and our utility boxes, and how it doesn't it doesn't always include people of color in those. And so there are specific ways that we can start to show diversity, not with our language and these events, but also with our signage and our public art. So thanks for sharing.
I just add one point to the idea of signage, that that businesses having this type of sign, it would be based on actual engagement in this type of conversation, implicit bias training or some kind of work like this, that this sign would be like earned and have something behind it.
Absolutely. And someone just typed that in as well. It's actions that matter and not words. And I'm hopeful that both can lead to some of these changes that we're asking for. And then we have some information from breakout room 2. And Lisa, I'm going to pick on you again.
Okay. No problem. So we had a little bit of a difficulty kind of getting started on this conversation in regards to emotions and what does that mean. But there was a theme that, if there was a change for a more inclusive Los Gatos, that would be a really great thing. But so often the town is focused on preservation of the way it's always been, the aesthetics of the town. And there needs to be a message that inclusivity won't change the look and the feel of the town. They like having these conversations, these honest conversations. There was a common theme. I mentioned that already, sorry. But one comment that was made is that there isn't always an opportunity for the residents to participate in the council meetings just because it's the same time every night, but not everybody's available to take time out of their evening to come to the council meetings. So when changes happen and people are surprised, it's because they haven't been able to participate, but there was a feeling that Zoom has really opened up this ability for people to participate in the meetings, even a session like this. And there's a hope that the participation or the availability of some hybrid of Zoom and in-person meetings would be able to occur in the future after COVID ends. And then in terms of what social changes need to occur in the town, there was a feeling that Los Gatos has had the same generations of families that lived here. 2, 3, 4 generations have always lived in Los Gatos. So from that aspect, it could be difficult for some people to accept changes in the town and diversity. But there's also a feeling that schools need to be doing a better job of teaching diversity, starting at the lower grade levels in grammar schools, and to open minds to different perspectives. And something that I thought was really interesting is that there's currently kind of a push to diversify the education, the type of books that are being required of students to read. And the comment that a teacher made was, well, we're reading this book because it's a classic. Well, all the classic books historically are written by white people. So why, so how if our students are constantly being exposed to these classics that are written from the white perspective, how is that going to help them diversify their thought processes? And there needs to be more diversity in the types. Yes, it was To Kill a Mockingbird was the book. Thank you. And if we can't have classics that are written by people of color, how can we diversify the education of our students?
Thank you. Thank you. And I appreciate everyone adding their comments into the chat. The common theme that I'm seeing from almost every breakout room is housing. Jeff Suzuki, do you want to share a little bit? I mean, I know that's an area that your breakout room also focused on.
Yeah, so similar flow of thoughts. There's a conflict between pride in the community, where people want to feel pride in terms of what already exists, and also a need for change. This community is becoming increasingly introspective and about the problems that are going on here, and those people want change. Some people want to keep things exactly the way they are, and this is problematic. There's also hope, because there are people who are younger, people like Nika, the younger generation, more people people who have never participated in local politics, coming out to town council meetings and making their voice heard. In terms of, I find it very interesting that a very large number of people have brought up housing, even though none of the questions specifically had to do with housing. And I think that that's a testament of a culture that is being produced by very specific hard-lined policies in our town government, specifically regarding the culture. So in the last part of my summary, I say that the culture around housing is currently problematic. And one of our group members said that a lot of people view housing more as an investment vehicle than an actual utility that allows people to live here. It's this idea that when we have nobody will come out ever and say anything like, no, we shouldn't have affordable housing in Los Gatos. Nobody would ever have the audacity to say something like that. But they will always have something to say. If it's not absolutely perfect and it doesn't appeal to them personally, then they'll always come up with a catalog of excuses to oppose it. So there were a lot of cultural elements regarding something as abstract as housing in our group.
Thank you. Thank you. And Holly included our discussion. And one of the things that we also talked about in breakout room 3 was just not only the concrete problems, but what gives us hope, and what are the small things that we're seeing right now that gives us hope to continue to aspire, to have us to have more of these conversations and know that we're at least moving in the right direction, even if it's through baby steps. And one of the key things, and it's our final polling question, that I think what we always grapple with as a town is that we can hold these community sessions, but how do you get people to attend? And how do you get people to feel comfortable sharing their thoughts and their experiences? And so what we'd really like to utilize are what's happening in other areas. And for those of you that have met Kareem, he's talked about these virtual living room conversations where you have these real conversations with your neighbors, with your friends, with someone maybe that is in the business next to you. And that's what we're hoping that we can continue to have after this large conversation. And what, if Shelley, it could ask that final polling question. And if you are willing, if you could include your name in the chat box, and we'll see if about organizing more of these smaller virtual living room conversations. And what we're also going to do, thank you for those that are starting to put their names there. As we've mentioned, we are keeping the record of the conversations and the notes. And our mayor will wrap up and share what we intend to do with this. But on a personal level, I just want to thank each and every one of you for joining us tonight. You could be doing something else. We all know that. And just as I said, oftentimes it's how do we get those that don't necessarily believe in what we're talking about right now to come to these? And if there's any way that we as a town or we as individuals can help facilitate these conversations, please reach out to one another. Because as I shared earlier, when we began this session, there were some pretty hurtful things that we're uncovering about our town. But I'm also hopeful that through these conversations, you're also realizing that there's some wonderful people. And by all of us being together and all of us willing to make these hard conversations and willing to make some difficult choices, that we can create this inclusive Los Gatos that we all desire. And it's heartwarming to know that 100% of us, at least at this workshop, believe that we can do better and that we should be doing better. And so for that, thank you so much. Thank you to all our town staff that participated. And again, Vice Mayor Spector, Councilmember Rennie, thank you for being part of the conversations today. And Mayor Jensen, I turn to you now.
Thank you very much, Councilwoman Sayoc. I wouldn't want to echo the thanks for all of you who have participated with us tonight. There is something else that was competing with us that was somewhat interesting, but you came and lent us your time and attention and your thoughts and your feedback. And for that, we thank you very much. This is definitely a step in the right direction. What I heard tonight is, I'm going to take away as sort of some themes. One, maybe our quote, unique small town charm, unquote, is a bit of a problem for diversity and inclusivity, that we need to think beyond what our buildings look like and what our thematic kind of idea is and say, you know, our unique small town can be a lot better with a lot kinds of different people, different businesses, different houses, different transportation, whatever it may be, that to move forward, there is going to be some change, and that these kind of conversations are where that change starts. The other thing I heard is that we need to talk about how we might reshape some of our policies to advance some of these directives. So with that, I'm going to invite all of you, please pay attention to our General Plan Advisory Committee. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to be discussing what's called the land use element. There, we're going to discuss policies that have to do with density, have to do with zoning, have to do with where residences could be, how high they can be. So this is a really good place to get in on the ground floor, if you will, for housing discussions and policy discussions. And please keep engaged with the council and figure out what's going on. Really appreciate that. But my final word is, when we want to make change in our society, besides having these conversations, which I truly hope we continue to have, we have a unique opportunity in 11 days to vote. So take your comments, take your theories, take whatever it is that you have learned or thought about tonight to the ballot box. And on November 3rd, if not before, vote. Learn what the issues are, learn what people stand for. Do they reflect your values? Do they not? and vote as an informed voter and get out there and do it. That will help our town be a better place. We appreciate it. And one of the things that helps our town be a better place, and I can't leave without saying this, all of our council participated in all of our community workshops. All of our residents, faith leaders, school leaders, business leaders came out to help us form these workshops. And our staff has participated in very difficult times when they're doing their jobs in a way that is unusual, took their time tonight to support this. They've supported it throughout. And I just want to say that we are very lucky to have these people working with us and for us in Los Gatos. And with that, thank you so much for your participation. Get out and vote. And we hope to have more of these conversations in the future. So with that, good night and thank you.